Hi guys, my name is Alessandra Messina and I will be presenting today on the chapter on Government and Law by B.F. Skinner. The beginning part of this chapter discusses a bit of group control and what that looks like, and that not all members of a particular group perform in the same way. And sometimes when you're talking about groups and control groups, they're sometimes not very well organized and the practice isn't consistent, but there definitely is a controlling member of that group, and that is determined by the other members. And when you have control groups, you have things that they're looking at like good and bad behavior, and each group is going to determine that good or bad behavior and what it's defined as for them. So the group is deciding, of course, what is considered good behavior and what is considered bad behavior. Some of the controlling agencies that are discussed here and are thought about is the government, religion, psychotherapy, economics, and education. And those all are part of that group of control. When you're thinking about control agencies, again, they typically have their own ideals set up. And what one agency may set up as their ideals doesn't necessarily translate to other agencies and what other agencies would consider working for them. It doesn't translate the same. Within control agencies, there is a breakdown of behavior and what behavior looks like. And it's typically not something that can be characterized through just the simple agency facts. You can't characterize someone by the facts of the agency. You want to, of course, when defining behavior, make sure that you're using better conditions to define that behavior, and you want to be sure that you're supporting the scientific study of it. Of course, with that, you want to be sure that you're using what is called a functional analysis of behavior. Now, this functional analysis of behavior is used across all agencies and is common in all field work, and it's recognized as such. When looking at control agencies, under that there is a social system, and the social system is considered the controllee and the controllers of that particular agency. And when you're talking about the controller, that's typically someone who is able to manipulate the variables of that particular agency. And the controllee, again, is the one who is affected by those variables and how things are reinforced. And with the use of that reinforcement, they want to make sure that everything is continuing to be effective. And in being effective, it's going to continue the rules, regulations, and the agency itself. Now, the bigger part of this chapter, of course, is the government. And the government is a pretty big agency that uses typically power to punish. And the most obvious agency within the government, obviously, are the police and the military. And the police and the military typically use physical force and equipment to ensure that people are following those rules and regulations that are identified by the government. When you're thinking about the police and military, they are typically recruited additionally by education, the economic agency, as well as religion. When they're taking into consideration the analysis of the members of this government agency, the individuals are typically chosen by the group, and the techniques that are used are determined by the person who uses them, and they want to be sure that they're being used and maintained in order to keep their position as such. Now, with the techniques of government control, you're looking at what they're defining, obviously, as right and wrong. And typically with a group, you're looking at right and wrong, and government typically identifies it as legal or illegal. And with punishment, It's typically contingent, obviously, on particular behaviors. Now, when they're defining something as illegal behavior, again, you're looking at punishment. And when punishment is placed, it's usually identified either as the removal of positive reinforcers or it's the addition of a negative reinforcer. So you're looking at either taking something away, like property, or you're taxing someone. And then when you're looking at some of those negative reinforcers, sometimes you're looking at, unfortunately, the threat of injury or inflicting pain. Obviously, they're doing this to make sure that these behaviors and illegal actions don't happen again. And they want to, unfortunately, make someone feel shame or guilt in order for those behaviors not to come back and to keep people obedient and reduce the probability of that behavior happening again. Now, when you're thinking about law, a law has two important features. And the two important features of the law are that it obviously specifies behavior and it implies consequences. When you're talking about specifying behavior, you're not necessarily looking at what the behavior looks like. You're looking at what its effect on others are. You're looking at the effect that it has on the object of the government control. When you're looking at implying consequences, you're usually looking at punishment, and the consequence is the law is the rule of conduct. A quote by Skinner is, "A law is thus a statement of a contingency of reinforcement maintained by a government agency." Under the law, there's two ways and two groups of people that are obviously affected by the law. You're looking at the controller and the controllee. And when you're talking about the controllee, they're kind of looking at how to analyze how someone learns to lie, to steal, or to assault other people. They want to see where that comes from. Is it typically it's left to the parents or friends of that person to make sure that they are behaving within legal boundaries. And they're also looking, again, at the conditioning of others. How do they learn it? Where is it coming from? And typically the effect and how it affects those that sometimes witness punishment. So sometimes you have someone who witnesses someone getting hurt because they're performing a legal act. Maybe they're not going to perform that act again, or they get arrested for a particular situation, and maybe that person is going to think twice about performing that illegal act in the hopes that they won't have that same consequence. And the effects on the actual controlling agency, they're looking at what they're typically looking at is determining obviously what the illegal behavior is and what that code of punishment is going to look like. They're setting up their codification. They're wanting to be sure that the punishment is indeed carried out. And typically with punishment, it's divided and carried out between the subdivisions of a particular agency. So with behavior, if you're looking at some of the traditional interpretations of that, you are, according to that, just to be what you're supposed to be. You're supposed to conform. You're supposed to follow the legal laws. You're supposed to do what you're supposed to do. As a human being, you're supposed to be held accountable for those kinds of things. You're supposed to be held accountable for your behavior. If you're looking with punishment, it's obviously geared from the source of the government that it comes from, right? So there's the governor or the governed. There are different ways that they look at those kinds of things or how they use control techniques. When you're talking about the governor, if an illegal act is performed, it's typically considered an offense to the state. It's considered disturbance of the peace, and it threatens the power of that particular agency. And with punishment, the punishment is typically vindicated by the state when that kind of goes through. When you're looking at the governed with punishment, it's kind of something that you're looking at to even the score, what they would consider to even the score. They typically have the punishment that's going to fit the crime, kind of an eye for an eye type of situation. But overall, it makes it less likely to happen again, because people, again, don't want that reoccurrence and don't want to serve the jail time. Sometimes when you're looking at jail time, you're looking at, in certain situations, there are people who are unable to be controlled because they are determined insane. And sometimes those punishments are what we would think are lesser. They don't necessarily get the death penalty for a horrific crime, but they get sort of a rehabilitation or a psychotherapy in order to rebuild that particular situation. So, and the last part here on government control, when you're thinking of the ethical part, you're looking at the rights and the wrongs. With educational agencies, they're typically using conditioning, motivation, and emotion to typically get what they need. And when you're looking at the economic agency, you're obviously looking at taxation as well. So overall, the government manipulates the variables to make the rules so that people follow those rules. In order to do this, with people following rules, the government continues to function in an appropriate way. And the more followers the particular government has, the more power that government has indeed. So some of the ethical principles that I found here to be appropriate were listed here: integrity, professional and scientific relationships, maintaining records, considerations in regarding punishment, ethical violations. And some of the ones that I felt most important were things like integrity. You want to be sure that the people you are working with are trustworthy and honest. You want to hope that they're fostering honesty and following through with their obligations and commitments that they've made. They're following through with illegal and ethical codes that they've developed and want people to adhere to. When you're looking at multiple relationships and conflicts of interest, you want to obviously try to avoid them. They can be harmful. You don't want people accepting gifts for various illegal activities or to get lesser punishments of things. You definitely don't want to be accepting gifts there. And again, you want to be sure that you're maintaining confidentiality. You're maintaining confidentiality with your clients, with all of the people you work with. You want to be sure to discuss this at the beginning of the relationship and discuss confidentiality as a whole to be able to protect those you're working with. And of course, you don't want to use social media on any of those accounts. And lastly, you want to be able to make sure that you're maintaining records and all material appropriately. You want to make sure that things, when they're created or sorted, being transferred, are confidential and following all those rules. And when you're disposing of records as well, you want to make sure that you're following rules and regulations, corporate laws, and all those organizational policies to make sure that you're keeping the confidentiality of all people involved. That's truly important to positive relationships. So that's the end of the chapter on government and law. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Here are some of my references. Thanks so much for watching and taking the time. Bye, guys.